thank our worship team for doing such a great job week after week. We really appreciate the hard work they put in. I love that last medley they put together. The two songs mashed together was really, really pretty. So thank you, worship team, for that. Have you ever done something? I don't know what it might have been, but you ever done something? Maybe you had to do it. Maybe it was just one of those things that you found yourself, you're doing it, but your heart just wasn't in it. Your heart just wasn't there. Maybe you went to a party or some type of celebration. Everybody else seemed to be having a really good time. They're really into it, but maybe there was something weighing heavy on your mind and your heart just wasn't there. Your heart wasn't into it. That's happened to me throughout my lifetime. There's been times when it seems like everybody else is having a good time at me and there's just maybe stuff going on. I can't get it to shut off in my brain or whatever. That happens sometimes. Remember back in the days of school when you had school projects? Man, there were some students that I went to school with that loved those school projects where you would build like a cabin and it'd be like this periodic historical thing, and man, they were into it. And then there was me. I came in to school with I stole this foam thing from my mom's flower arrangement, and I had a toothpick with a marshmallow on it, and the popsicles, the glue wasn't even dried on it yet. And I look back on that, and I think, man, these people brought these projects in. They're like A+ all day long for sure, and then there's mine. My heart just wasn't into it, and maybe that was your experience. I don't know. I also can remember growing up hearing the national anthem hundreds of times, right? Every sporting event you would go to, you either sung or you heard the national anthem. And for me, it was hundreds of times I had experienced that, but it wasn't until the week after the events of 9/11 that something changed for me. I can remember going to the first football game after that had all happened, and there was just something that changed. There was a fullness of love and appreciation and gratitude in my heart that wasn't there a week ago. And it wasn't even that I didn't like the song. I had no bad feelings towards the song, but something changed. And I look back on that. What was it? It wasn't the song, right? The song's still the same song. The central band didn't get any better in a week. I know that. That's a joke. Calm down. I can run faster than most of you, so I don't know. Well, hopefully we'll find out. It wasn't the song or the way it was played. Something changed in my heart, and it caused me to connect to that song in a different way because my heart was full of appreciation and gratitude for living in a country where there's freedom and for those who have bled and died for that freedom, those who protect it today. There was something that changed in me, and it changed that song for me. I don't know if you've had that experience or not, but there's been times in my life, maybe there's been times in your life where you're doing something and maybe you're just going through the motions of it. Your heart just isn't in it. I want to welcome you back to this series that we've been walking through called What Would Jesus Undo? And some of you can remember the bracelets or the t-shirts back from the 1990s that had the letters WWJD. What would Jesus do? And it was a really great question, still is a great question, to filter our decisions through, to filter our priorities through, to consider when I'm making a decision, when I'm doing something or not doing something, to just ask myself the question, how would Jesus, based on his example, based on what he taught in the Gospels, how would Jesus handle this? What would Jesus do in this situation? Still a great question to filter our lives through, for sure. But this series is asking a slightly different question. It's asking, what would Jesus undo in your life? If Jesus were to edit my life or yours, what would he change? Would there be things about my decisions, my behaviors, my attitudes, or yours that Jesus would want to change, that he would undo? That's what this series has been about. And week 1, we talked about spiritual indifference. And we learned that it's not okay to walk through life thinking that, a meh kind of attitude towards the things that matter to Jesus, the people that matter to Jesus. It's not okay to walk through life like that with spiritual indifference. In fact, we learned in Revelation chapter 3, we learned that when we act that way, when we think that way, when our heart has spiritual indifference in it, it causes Jesus to be nauseous. The literal image there is that of wanting to vomit. So that's obviously not okay. So we talked about spiritual indifference, and that's definitely something Jesus would want to undo in our lives and in our hearts. Now, last week here at Lamersville, at the campus here, we had Jason Camerine from as a missionary to Cameroon. I have to get those two things straight. And he did a great job. We love Jason. I heard really good things from some folks that I talked to. I got the chance to see it, did a great job. But Pastor Matt at our Juniata campus, we're syncing up on this series together, and he actually preached on hypocrisy, that Jesus would want to undo hypocrisy in our lives and in our hearts. So if you missed either one of those, we'll make sure that they are posted to our website. So you should be able to catch up on all three, those two plus today's, by either tonight or early tomorrow morning. But here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about worship. We're going to talk about empty worship and how Jesus would want to undo a hollow, empty worship in our lives and in our hearts. So I'm going to ask, if you would, to open your Bibles up to Matthew chapter 15. This is definitely something that Jesus would want to undo if he were to find it in our hearts or in our lives, this idea of empty worship, Matthew 15. I wanted to offer this suggestion to you too. I know in the months past, prior to all of this pandemic stuff, we had paper bulletins, and some of you used those for notes, and that worked well. We do have the digital bulletin, whether you're using your phone or your tablet, and hopefully that is helpful to you. You can find that on our website. But I just offer this as a suggestion, because I know for me, writing things out by hand helps me to retain information. Like even when I do sermon prep, I write everything out. All of my notes, I write all of those out by hand before I type anything. And so for me, that's kind of how I retain things better. So if that's how your brain is wired and it's helpful to you to write things out by hand, I would suggest that you get a notebook, have that be your sermon notebook, bring that with you and take notes that way. Nice thing about that is 6 months from now, if you've got a thought about worship and you're like, man, what did we talk about? You could pull out your notebook and go back and be reminded of the things that we're talking about today. So just a suggestion to you if the digital notes are not your thing. Matthew chapter 15, I want to start in verse 1. Some of the Pharisees and teachers of religious law now arrived from Jerusalem to see Jesus. They asked him this question: "Why do your disciples disobey our age-old tradition? For they ignore our tradition of ceremonial hand-washing before they eat." Jesus, why don't your disciples wash their hands before they eat? And if you just jumped into this part of the Gospel of Matthew without a lot of context behind it, you might come to the conclusion, what's going on in Jerusalem? Are they having coronavirus issues in Jerusalem back in the ancient world? And everybody's really uptight about washing their hands. Like, Jesus, you got to get your disciples in the bathroom and wash their hands. They're going to get sick. You're going to get all these people in the city sick. Get in there and happy birthday it up. You got to get in there and get that done. And while you're at it, make sure that if you're up on the hillside, and you're passing out your tons of bread and fish to hold the crowds, you got to have hand sanitizer ready for those people and spread them out a little bit. That's not, all those things are fine. I've been washing my hands for a long time. All right, this whole thing isn't what convinced me to start washing my hands. But that's not what they were worried about. This had nothing to do with hygiene. Hygiene's good, but that's not what this concern or this question was about. This was a ceremonial hand-washing issue, and you have to understand that for a devout Jew, everything can be broken down into two categories. You have clean and unclean. You can pretty much break down everything in life into clean and unclean, whether it's a particular food that would be clean or unclean, a particular animal, a particular object. Some objects are clean, some objects are unclean. And there are certain ways to prepare food that would be considered making it fit to eat, making it clean instead of unclean. So all of these different things that for the devout Jew, clean and unclean. And being unclean is a contagious state of being. So if there's something that is unclean because it's contagious, you got to do contact tracing with that stuff. So if I touch something unclean, let's say I touch a pig, I touch a dead body, now I'm unclean because I touched something unclean. And anything that I touch now is unclean. So if I touch another person, unclean. If I touch a spork, that spork is unclean. So now Grandma and her favorite spork are totally unclean because I touched one of those two things and she ate her potato salad or whatever. So and there's a lot of those kind of things to keep track of. And the ceremonial hand washing was a reminder about a clean heart. That was the point of it, but it had become, as they put it here, this tradition. And it had become, for some, more important than what it represented, more important than the reminder of what they were trying to communicate with it in the first place. And so I wanted to talk to you about what that was like, give you kind of an image of the clean, unclean, the washing of hands, the ceremonial. So I was reading how they did it, but then I thought, well, I'd kind of like to see it demonstrated, so I got on YouTube. You can find anything on YouTube, right? And so I watched a rabbi, current, nowadays rabbi, and he demonstrated how to do the ceremonial hand washing. I'm just going to say this right now. Don't get on your phone and look at this on YouTube right now. Wait till the sermon's over. Have some self-control. I'm going to describe it to you, and you can watch it on the way home if you want to do that. When you would wash ceremonially your hands, the amount of water, there was a ratio between the amount of water that was used that correlated to the amount of bread that you ate and how many eggs were in the mixture of that bread. There was this whole formula of how much water you needed. And you had a basin, you had your clean water or a sink, and you take the cup of clean water, and your hand needed to be fingers spread apart, facing down, and you would start at the wrist, not above the wrist, not below the wrist, at the wrist. That was very specific, and you had to get the whole hand, make sure the fingers are out and it comes down. Don't get it up like this, because then that water will come down onto your forearm. Now your forearm's unclean, you got to start all over. It's a thing. So you wash that hand, and then you would do the other hand, and then it would be time to dry. When you put your hands up to dry, you had to pray. Don't dry your hands and then pray. It doesn't count. You got to start over. If some of the water drips down onto your forearm, that water is unclean. So don't put your hand back down until it's dry, because if that water comes back down onto your hand's unclean, you got to start over. There's a lot of things to keep track of, and this rabbi was going through all of these descriptions and rules and things how to do it. It's kind of making my head spin. How do you remember all of that? Well, this is what the Pharisees, the teachers of the law, were upset about. Well, what's the big deal? This clean and unclean thing. Here's the issue. The issue is if you're unclean, you are unfit for worship. That's why it mattered. That's why this was an issue. And they were looking at the disciples and saying they didn't wash their hands in the ceremonial fashion, therefore they're unclean, therefore they're unfit for worship. Jesus responded to them in verse 3. Jesus replies, "And why do you, by your traditions, violate the direct commandments of God?" Now just pause on that for a moment. Here's the question. So if we've got a tradition of men, and it had a point to it, right? The point was a ceremonial symbol of what's supposed to be happening. We should have a clean heart when we worship God. But it's become this tradition thing. You put a lot of value in it. Why is it that this tradition has been elevated above a direct commandment of God? That was his question. If a direct command from God and a tradition of men collide together, which should win? The commandment of God should win that collision. Jesus asks them this. He says, "Why do you, by your traditions, violate the direct commandments of God?" And he gives them an example of how they're doing it. For instance, God says, "Honor your father and mother. Anyone who speaks disrespectfully of father or mother must be put to death." Now, who is he talking to? He's not addressing kids living under the authority of mom and dad. That's not the issue. He's talking about adults. And adults are expected, God expects us to care for our parents, to love them, to respect them. And in this particular case, what was happening is there was an expectation to care for mom and dad if they had a financial hardship, that the children were supposed to help out with that. Honor your father, honor your mother. Anyone who speaks disrespectfully of mom or dad must be put to death. So that's all things that God has said of his expectations. But verse 5, but you say it's all right for people to say to their parents, sorry, I can't help you. I've already vowed to give God what I would have given to you. So what was happening was, let's say you're an adult and you get mad at your parents for whatever, right? They're meddling. They're saying, this is how you should parent your kids. Now you're ticked off at them. Well, I'm just never going to speak to you again. And so one of these kind of situations where these adults are mad at their parents and their parents maybe have some type of financial issue, they need help, and the Pharisees had come up with a way so that they didn't have to help mom and dad. You're mad at mom and dad? No problem. Give the temple. Give us the money for the temple. And that will alleviate your obligation to your parents because you've already vowed that to God. That was the system that they had set up. And Jesus said, that's not okay. You're in direct violation of what God expects of us, and you put a tradition above it. Sorry, I can't help you. I've already vowed to give God what I would have given to you. And in this way, Jesus said, you say they don't need to honor their parents. And so you've canceled the word of God for the sake of your own tradition. It's a problem. And he calls them hypocrites in verse 7. And he says the prophet Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you. Look how the prophet Isaiah describes, and then Jesus uses the words of Isaiah to describe these people. Verse 8, these people honor me with their lips, their external things that they do for other people to see. Right? We'll look at that in a second. These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts, what's going on in here? Their hearts are far from me. Their worship is a farce. Their worship is empty. It's hollow. They teach man-made ideas as if they are the commands from God. You're worried about this ceremony, this ritual, this symbolic reminder of what really matters, which is a clean heart. But he says your hearts aren't clean. Your hearts are far from God. God says to honor your parents, and you're not doing that. Your hearts aren't right with God. I want to read that again to you. This is from the prophet Isaiah. You honor me with your lips, but your heart is far from me. You worship me in vain. Your worship is a farce. Your worship is empty. And I could put it this way, your heart just isn't in it. Your heart isn't in it. And I want to ask you a hard question. And when I mean a hard question, I mean it this way, that sometimes if I ask a question like this, it's really easy for us to give ourselves a pass, to assume this is somebody else's problem. Couldn't possibly be your heart. Couldn't possibly be my heart. But I'm just going to ask of you to please try to be as honest with yourself as you possibly can be when I ask the question, is it possible that Jesus would want to undo something about your worship? Is that a possibility, that there is something in your life, something in your heart that Jesus would want to undo when it comes to your expression of worship or your life as an expression of worship? If I were to ask the question, most people, I think, automatically think about music, right? When I hear the word worship, a lot of people jump right in and they connect the dot right to music. And I understand that because music is a really important part of our expression of worship for sure. I think oftentimes there can be tensions, sometimes even arguments among Christians, and they have these tensions, these arguments over style, right? Style of music or style of the worship setting itself, these kinds of things. And there are those who would say, listen, the best kind of style, the best style of worship is that traditional style with songs out of the hymn book, and everyone dresses up, and you have certain classical instruments that are played, that formal, traditional style, that's what honors God the best. And then there are those who say, no, I don't think that's true. I think a more modern style is what honors God the best. When we have an exciting atmosphere and maybe a little more casual approach to dress, lots of instruments, that is what really honors God because our hearts are really in it. I don't know how many of you have had the opportunity to experience different styles of worship, different styles of singing or church services. I've had the opportunity, the blessing of being able to experience church services and worship styles and music styles from all over the world. I grew up in a very traditional. When I say traditional, we have what we call a traditional service here, and it's not anything as far as what traditional was when I was growing up. When I was growing up, the traditional expression of worship, yes, we sang hymns out of a hymn book, not off of a screen like this, and there was a choir with robes and those types of things, and there was a piano and an organ. Those were the only acceptable instruments, and it always kind of interested me when I was growing up. Even this morning, I read my devotions this morning was out of Psalm 33, and talked about singing a new song to God, and there was a lot of emphasis placed on the harp, which don't see many people using a harp, but that was a really important instrument in ancient days, and there were percussion instruments that were really important, and lots of stringed instruments that were important in worshiping God, and that kind of all seemed like that wasn't part of our worship expression growing up. And I also noticed that we always sang out of the hymn book verses 1, 2, and 4. I'm not exactly sure why everyone was mad at verse 3. I'm still not sure what verse 3 did to tick everybody off, but you dare not sing verse 3. It's 1, 2, and 4. And so that was the expression of worship. Well, then, get into my youth days, and you go to youth conference, Momentum, and I went to some of my friends' churches, and a little more lively expression of music and worship in those environments. Now, in fact, one time I had the opportunity to go to a church, a charismatic church, with a friend of mine, and that was my first experience in that type of in worship environment. And I can remember wondering, why does everyone have a question all at the same time? Everyone's really excited about their question, and I knew what was happening. They were very enthusiastic about their expression of worship. When I was in Nigeria, we had on a Sunday morning we had the opportunity to go to 2 different churches, and the first church that we went to was very lively. And one of the things the band and all that. One of the things I really loved about it was when it came time for the offering, the way they did that. They had a basket like this. I don't have any idea if it was because they didn't want to pass a plate. I don't know why they did it that way, but they did. And the basket was at the front, and the worship band would play this very lively song, a celebration-style song. And row by row, they would all get. It was like a conga line, if you can imagine. And they would dance, and they were celebrating as they brought their offering, and it was a really exciting time. It was the most exciting offering time I've ever experienced. And I came home and I said to my wife, "We got to do this." And she said, "No, you can't do that. People won't like that." So we experienced that, and that was in the first church that we went to. And then the next church, it was only a couple miles down the road. I had the opportunity to preach in that church that morning, and it was very different. It was very formal, no dancing. It was a very traditional style. Everyone was sitting like you're very proper. It was just a different style and expression of worship. When we went to Haiti, the churches that we were in Haiti, very lively again, and I don't speak Haitian, so it was one of those things where I didn't know the words, but you can get into the vibe of the music and be able to be part of that experience. And one of the interesting things about worship in Haiti, in a church service, is imagine we have 2 singers or 3 singers or whatever, and one of them would be singing, and everyone really likes this singer, right? And so there would be people that would come up and they would give the singer money, like a tip, like, "You're doing a great job, we love it, you're killing it." And so they would bring money up, and then this person would be done singing their solo, and this person would sing a solo, and like nothing, nobody liked what they were doing, and I felt so terrible for for the other person as they were singing. I thought they did a great job. But it was just a different expression, a different way of doing it. So I don't know if you've experienced some of these different things in life or not, but the question always comes up, which is right? There's all kinds of experiences, all kinds of expressions of worship. Well, which is right? People want to know which is right. So I'm going to give you an answer. I want you to think about it, write it down, and then we'll talk about it. Here it is. All of them or none of them. Ready? All of them or none of them. It's not about the style, it's about the condition of the heart. It's about the condition of the heart. Any expression of worship that honors God happens when our hearts connect to God's heart, when we give God our best, whether that's in a traditional song style, in a suit, in a tie, or in a more casual setting with a guitar and one of those bongo things, whatever, right? It's about the condition of the heart. And there is no form or expression of worship that is right when our hearts aren't right with God. When our hearts are far from God. What does Jesus say? You honor me. He quotes Isaiah. You honor me with your lips, but your heart is far from me. You're worshiping me in vain. Your worship is empty. Your worship is hollow. I got a new suit, got some new pants on today. I got a new suit that I had ordered before all of this happened. The day that I went to pick it up, they shut down the place. And so my suit has been in quarantine for months. And it's really made me angry. So I finally was able to get my suit out of quarantine. They finally opened back up. The jacket is in my office just in case I need it, right? So I've got these new pants. So imagine I've got a tie and I got my new jacket on and I look really good. Has nothing to do with my heart. I could look amazing in a brand new suit and it has nothing to do with my heart. I could sing every note, pitch perfect, has nothing to do with my heart. It's not about the clothes that we have on if our hearts aren't right. It's not about the style of the song that we're singing if our hearts are far from God. God cares way more about the condition of your heart and my heart than He does about what we're wearing, than He does about the style of song that we're singing. Now, I just want to say this to you as well. I think sometimes the reason that we sometimes feel these tensions and want to argue with other people about these kind of things is we have a tendency to forget that we're not the objects of worship and that God is the audience. I also want to say this to you. I don't want you to hear what I'm saying as being overly critical about having preferences or being someone who connects to a particular style. There's nothing wrong with that either. Some of you have a particular song in a particular style of or genre of music, and when you hear that song, man, your heart is connected to God in a special way. My wife and I were traveling to Pittsburgh many years ago. We were taking Faith over, our youngest daughter, Faith, for one of her surgeries, and about halfway we hit the crest of this one hill and both kind of feeling anxious or overwhelmed by what we're about to experience. And the song from Casting Crowns came on the radio, Praise You in the Storm, and just in that moment, God used that song to bring His peace, to just pour His love and His confidence into our souls. I can still remember that moment like it happened yesterday. But was it the tune? Was it a well-written lyric that I needed at that moment? Or was it just the love and the peace of God that I needed in my pain? And God just used that particular song in that particular moment. So those things are important. I get that. I have that in my life, and there's nothing wrong with appreciating a song that has such a deep theological expression in it that you just really, really appreciate the way that is written. Nothing wrong with any of that. We have to remember that God cares way more about our hearts than He does about the style of a song. When I was in those other countries, what I found amazing was even though there were some of those churches, I didn't even know the language and couldn't sing along in that same way, but my heart was still able to connect with God. I found that fascinating. Because it was about not the song itself. It was about being in the presence of God's children and experiencing being able to pray. Even though I couldn't maybe sing along with that particular song, there was an expression of worship that connected my heart to His. My sister, Corey, now you all know my sister Michelle, but I have another sister. We adopted Corey as a baby, and she lives in Carlisle. One of her biological parents was African American, and so now as an adult, she, living in Carlisle, connects to the worship style of an African American style of church service. It's beautiful and it's amazing. It's not about the style. It's about the condition of our hearts that God is more concerned about. Let me illustrate it one more way. Last week was Father's Day. And I want you to imagine, now my kids don't love me enough to do this for me, but imagine that they did. Kidding, my kids love me. Imagine that my kids on Father's Day came into our bedroom and they had a song prepared. Like all three of them came in and they were just dressed real formal, and they started singing this like Mozart classic style of song, and they really put a lot of hard work into it. And the song was about how much they love me and how much they appreciate all that I do for them. And I said to them, "Nah, time out you go. I don't like classical music. Mozart was a jerk. Get out of my room. Come back with something better." Okay. Imagine they leave. They come back 15 minutes later, new outfit. You know, it's more of a casual beach vibe to it. And Elijah's playing the guitar, and Hannah's singing like a Jimmy Buffett style song or whatever, really getting it going. And I said, whoa, time out. No, out you go. Don't come in here. If you're not going to appreciate me in a less casual way, don't bother. Be gone. Okay. So out they go maybe one more time, and they come back in 15 minutes later, and this time, man, it is a production. We're talking lights and fog machines and skinny jeans, the whole bit. And lots of different instruments. It's a production. They really put a lot of time and effort and hard work into the song. And my response is, no. I don't know what you guys' problem is. I don't know how I could have made it more clear, but I don't like what you're doing. If you're not going to come in here with a wooden spoon and a pot and start banging on that, I don't want to hear. That's the only expression of song that I want to hear from you guys. That'd be a pretty rough thing as a dad. I can't imagine. Like if my kid, I wouldn't care what the style, what the genre was. If my kids came in and they're singing a song of love and appreciation, and that would be amazing. So this is what I expect. I don't know where they're at in the room. They got to be in here somewhere. No, I'm just kidding. Can you imagine, though, God not appreciating your heart of love and appreciation, whatever this style is? He wants to connect with your heart. I want you to go with me to Romans chapter 12. We talked a little bit about music because it's an important expression of our worship, but it's not what I want you to walk away with. That's important. I think it's important to talk about, but here's what I hope you'll leave with, what I hope that will be helpful to you moving forward from today, that worship is this. Worship is more than the songs that we sing. Worship is the life that we live. That's where I want us to land. That's where I'd like us to leave here, knowing that worship is more than the songs that we sing. Worship is the life that we live. And we see that in Romans chapter 12, verse 1. And so, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you, give your bodies to God because of all that He has done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind He will find acceptable. This is truly the way to worship Him. Let's break that down together. This idea of a living sacrifice, we don't do ritual sacrifices in our culture, so that phrase might be difficult to connect to this morning. The picture that Paul is painting for us with this image of a living sacrifice, giving ourselves to God fully is that of a Christian, a follower of Christ, who is fully committed, fully devoted to giving them their whole selves to God in an act of everyday worship, not just in the songs that we sing on Sunday morning, but honoring God with our decisions, honoring God with our priorities, honoring God with the way that we treat other people, honoring God in our ministries, in our generosity, everything in our lives, an act of worship, dedicating our everyday life. And that can happen no matter where you are. It's not confined to this room on a Sunday morning. Worship is at the job where you work at tomorrow morning. It's in the home that you're going to go home to later on this morning. Worship is something that happens in the fun things and exciting things of life where we have an attitude of an expression of gratitude. And it's also in those difficult days when we're going through sad times or challenging times in life that we're not even sure what it's all going to look like on the other side of it. There's an opportunity to worship God. It's in the choices that we make and the priorities. Our lives are supposed to be an act of worship. And I think about that song, the national anthem, why it changed for me. It wasn't the song that changed. The lyrics were the same, the tune was the same. What changed was my heart. My heart connected to it because my heart was filled with appreciation for freedom, with appreciation for those who died for that freedom, appreciation for those who protect that freedom. And I think that's Paul's point here. What does he say? Offer your whole selves, offer your bodies to God as a holy sacrifice. Why? Because of all that He has done for you. What has Jesus done that makes Him so worthy of our worship? Well, Jesus is God in the flesh. He's perfect, He's sinless, and yet He chose to come and die as a sacrificial payment to pay the sin debt that you and I owe to God, that we would have never been able to pay off on our own. But He didn't stay dead. He rose from the dead. He defeated death. He defeated sin. And He ascended back to heaven to the right hand of God the Father. He sent us His Holy Spirit. His Holy Spirit lives within the believer, gives us guidance and peace and comfort and strength, convicts our hearts when we're in the wrong, reminds us that we're totally forgiven when we repent. The Holy Spirit is an incredible gift from Jesus. Jesus prays for you. Jesus advocates for you and for me when we fail. So not only that we look back and all that Jesus has done for us in the past, but we can be thankful and appreciate all that Jesus is doing right now in our everyday lives. There is only one who is worthy of worship. And that worship needs to be so much more than the songs that we sing. It needs to be the life that we live. I wonder what that would look like. I wonder what it would look like for us to live a life of worship. I'm thinking about just practical ways to describe that to you, what it would actually look like. I mean, I think we could all agree that that's what the text teaches, and that the Bible is pretty clear that it's not just a song, that it is a life of worship. What does that actually mean? How do I do it? How do you do it? A life of worship impacts our daily choices. A life of worship impacts our daily priorities. How? Well, if worship is a desire to honor God, a desire to give Him our best, a desire to live in a way that pleases Him, right? If that's the act of worship that Romans 12:1 is describing, then wanting to honor God with my choices, with my decisions, with my priorities, with my behaviors, with my thoughts, with my attitudes, is an act of worship. Honoring God, giving Him my best. A life of worship impacts our relationships with other people. You know, there's so much anger and hatred that has infected our country. How refreshing would it be? How refreshing would it be to just be around people that just want to honor God with a heart of love and peace and kindness? And we can be that. And it's an act of worship when we treat others, when our relationships with others honor God. A life of worship would impact our expression of gratitude in our prayer life, in our singing, when we're at church, in our giving, in our generosity, in our serving. These things, we can honor God, and they can be that act of worship as we honor God. So I'm just going to ask you to take with you today 2 questions, and I'm going to ask this of you. Would you ask these 2 questions and have a discussion on the way home today? Would you take these 2 questions and maybe over lunch, ask them and discuss them over lunch today? I know it's tempting to say, well, this is a discussion on the way home. I like that song. I didn't like that song. Boy, I wish Pastor would have did this or that, right? But I'm just going to ask you to push those things, those conversations aside, and on the way home, over lunch, have a conversation with these 2 questions. Here's the first one. What would Jesus want to undo about your worship? Is there anything that you would conclude, whether it's your expression of singing, whether it's your attitude towards gathering, whether it's just the life choices that you're making? Is there something that you would say that Jesus would want to undo about your worship? And before you kind of let yourself off the hook and think, man, I'm killing it every Sunday, I just want you to understand, they see, right? I've been up on stage. I can look out too, right? And it's not everybody. This morning was amazing, by the way. The singing was, you guys really, you can tell the church is getting fuller. You can tell, and there's a momentum building, and you guys did a great job singing. And I know that God's heart was blessed. I know that God's heart was touched by your singing today, for sure. But it's not all across the room every week. It just isn't, right? There's some weeks you look out and it's like, is there a cat out there? What's going on out there? Song's up here, guys. So that happens. And I'm just saying, is it possible that, and I've been guilty of it. I've been guilty of it when there's times when I've gone through the motions and I haven't allowed my heart to connect to the heart of God. So is there something that God would want to undo, that Jesus would want to undo about your worship? Here's the second question. Is there something that Jesus would want to undo about your life that does not reflect a heart of worship in your everyday life? Your decisions, your priorities, your behaviors, your attitudes. You can fill in the blank. Would you ask those 2 questions today? Would you talk about that as a family, as a couple, over lunch or on the way home, and just see where the conversation goes? I know we've been having some really great conversations as a family over dinner, on Sundays, even throughout the week. We've been trying to ask these kind of questions and just see where our hearts are at. I think it's really healthy. It's really good to be able to have those conversations. Let's pray.